Victoria Ashworth stood in the center of her grand ballroom, her diamond earrings catching the light from 3 massive chandeliers above. She checked her watch for the 5th time in 2 minutes. The guests would start arriving in less than an hour, and her pianist had just called to cancel. A stomach virus, he said. She didn't care about the details. All she cared about was the empty piano bench and the 200 wealthy donors who expected perfection at her charity gala. This wasn't just any event. The mayor would be there, 2 senators, a handful of billionaires whose checkbooks could make or break her foundation's year. She'd spent 3 months planning every detail, from the imported orchids to the 7-course menu prepared by a chef who normally cooked for celebrities. And now disaster, Mrs. Ashworth. A quiet voice came from the doorway. Victoria turned to see Rosa, her housekeeper of 12 years, holding a stack of fresh linens. The woman had been with her family since Victoria's children were small. Reliable, quiet, never caused problems. Right now, though, Victoria didn't have time for household matters. Not now, Rosa. I have a crisis, Victoria said, her voice tight with stress. I know, ma'am. I heard about the pianist, Rosa said, stepping carefully into the room. My son, he plays piano. Maybe he could help tonight? Victoria barely heard the words. She was already scrolling through her phone, calling every musician contact she had. That's nice, Rosa, but I need a professional. This is the biggest night of the year. He's very good, ma'am. He's been playing since he was little. Victoria looked up from her phone, a bit irritated at the interruption. She saw the hope in Rosa's eyes and felt a flash of guilt. The woman was just trying to help. Fine, she said quickly. If he can play basic background music, send him over. But I'm still looking for a real replacement. Rosa's face lit up. Thank you, Mrs. Ashworth. I'll call him right now. He gets off his shift at 5. Shift? Victoria didn't bother asking. She had bigger problems to solve. An hour later, the first guests began arriving. Victoria plastered on her brightest smile, greeting everyone with air kisses and practiced enthusiasm. The caterers moved efficiently through the crowd with champagne and appetizers. Everything was going according to plan, except for the silent piano in the corner. She spotted Rosa near the service entrance, waving someone inside. A teenage boy walked in and Victoria's heart sank. He couldn't have been more than 17 or 18. He wore clean jeans and a button-down shirt that looked borrowed, probably his father's based on how the shoulders hung a bit too loose. His sneakers had seen better days. This was Rosa's pianist? The boy kept his head down as he walked through the glittering crowd. Victoria watched several guests glance at him, their expressions making it clear they wondered who let the helps kid into the party. She felt embarrassed for him. This was a mistake, but there was no time. The room was filling up. She needed music, any music, to cover the awkward silence between conversations. Rosa guided her son to the piano. Victoria noticed how the boy's hands trembled slightly as he sat on the bench. He looked terrified, completely out of place among the designer gowns and expensive suits. She almost stopped him, but then decided it didn't matter. People weren't here for a concert. They were here to network and be seen. He could play chopsticks for all they cared. The boy took a deep breath. His fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. Victoria turned away to greet a major donor, already dismissing the music from her mind. But something in the sound made her pause. The melody was growing, building, becoming something she didn't expect. Around the room, conversations began to falter. One by one, heads turned toward the piano. The boy's eyes were closed now, and his entire body moved with the music. His fingers danced across the keys with impossible speed and precision. What came from that piano wasn't background music at all. It was magic. The melody soared through the room, rich and complex. It started with something that sounded like classical music, the kind Victoria recognized from the opera. But then it shifted, bringing in jazz influences, then something modern she couldn't quite name. The boy wasn't just playing notes on a page. He was creating something entirely his own, right there in front of them. The entire ballroom had gone silent. 200 people, some of the most powerful in the city, stood frozen. Champagne glasses hung suspended midair. Conversations died on lips. Everyone was listening, truly listening to the music pouring from the piano. Victoria felt goosebumps rise on her arms. In all the years she'd been hosting these events, hiring professional musicians from prestigious conservatories, She'd never heard anything like this. This boy, this teenager in borrowed clothes and worn sneakers, was extraordinary. She glanced across the room and caught Rosa's eye. The housekeeper stood near the wall, tears streaming silently down her face as she watched her son play. In that moment, Victoria felt something uncomfortable twist in her chest. She'd almost said no. She'd dismissed the offer without a second thought. The music built to a crescendo that made the chandeliers seem to vibrate in sympathy. The boy's hands moved so fast they blurred. Then gradually, gently, he brought the piece back down to a whisper. The final notes hung in the air like perfume. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the room erupted in applause. The boy opened his eyes, looking startled, as if he'd forgotten where he was. His cheeks flushed red as all those wealthy strangers clapped for him. He gave a small, awkward nod and immediately started playing again. Something softer this time, retreating back into background music. But the spell was broken now. People couldn't stop glancing at the piano, couldn't stop whispering to each other. Who was this kid? Where did he learn to play like that? Victoria should have walked over right then. Should have asked his name, thanked him, acknowledged what she'd just witnessed. But a senator was approaching her with his wife, and she had donations to secure. She smiled and turned away from the piano, from the boy, from Rosa's proud tears. The music continued throughout the night, sometimes soft, sometimes building to breathtaking moments that stopped conversations cold. And through it all, Victoria worked the room, schmoozing and charming, barely registering the genius playing in the corner of her own home. It was just background music after all. That's what she'd needed, and that's what she told herself she was hearing. Nothing more than that. The morning after the gala, Victoria's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Text after text from guests praising the event, but most of them mentioned the same thing. Who was that incredible pianist? Where did you find him? That boy was absolutely brilliant. Victoria felt a strange mix of pride and discomfort. She'd taken credit with a simple, "I'm so glad you enjoyed him," without mentioning that she'd almost turned him away, that she didn't even know his name until Rosa reminded her later. Gabriel. His name was Gabriel. 3 days later, she was planning her next event. A smaller dinner party, just 40 people. When it came time to arrange music, she didn't even think twice. She called Rosa. "Is Gabriel available Friday night?" She could hear the smile in Rosa's voice. "Yes, Mrs. Ashworth, he'll be there." Victoria didn't ask what Gabriel might be giving up to play for her. Didn't wonder if he had other plans. She just assumed he'd be grateful for the work. That Friday, Gabriel arrived through the service entrance again. Same routine. Rosa led him to the piano. He sat down and he played. Beautiful, complex music that made the evening feel magical. When the night ended, Victoria handed him $200 in cash and a bright smile. "Wonderful job, Gabriel. Really wonderful." He took the money with a quiet thank you and left the way he came. This became the pattern over the next few months. Every event Victoria hosted, Gabriel was there. She'd text Rosa. Gabriel would show up, play for hours, and disappear. Victoria started to depend on him. Her guests certainly did. People would ask specifically if that amazing young pianist would be performing. But Victoria never sat down to talk with him. Never asked where he learned to play. Never wondered about his life beyond her events. To her, he was simply part of the help now. A very talented part, yes, but still just someone who worked for her. Like the caterers or the florists, she'd slip him cash at the end of each night, usually between $200 and $300, depending on how long he played. She thought she was being generous. After all, that was more than she paid her other staff. What Victoria didn't know was that Gabriel would go home after her parties and collapse into bed at 2 in the morning. Then wake up 4 hours later for his warehouse shift. He'd spend 8 hours lifting boxes, loading trucks, his fingers aching from both the piano and the physical labor. His manager at the warehouse didn't care that those hands created beauty. They were just there to work. Rosa watched her son growing more exhausted by the week. She saw the way his shoulders slumped when he got home, how he'd fall asleep at the dinner table, but she also saw the small stack of cash he kept in an envelope under his mattress. Money he was saving for something he wouldn't tell her about yet. Gabriel had a secret. 2 years ago, he'd won a competition, a full scholarship to one of the best music programs in the state, teachers who could help him develop his gift, a chance to study with real masters, a chance to become the pianist he knew he could be, but the scholarship only covered tuition. It didn't cover rent, food, or the medical bills from his father's death 3 years earlier. Bills that Rosa was still paying off slowly month by month. So Gabriel had deferred the scholarship, put his dream on hold, told himself it was just temporary. 1 year turned into 2. Now he was 17, working nights, playing for Victoria's wealthy friends, and teaching himself new pieces by watching videos on his phone during warehouse breaks. He'd compose entire symphonies in his head while stacking boxes, keeping his mind alive in the monotony. At Victoria's events, he'd see people his age. Children of the wealthy guests, home from their fancy colleges. They'd talk about their semesters abroad, their internships at prestigious companies, their spring breaks in places he'd never been. They looked right through him as if he were furniture. Sometimes, between songs, he'd overhear conversations. Business deals worth millions discussed over cocktails. Vacation homes bought on impulse. Cars that cost more than his entire life savings. And he'd look down at his worn shoes and borrowed shirt and feel invisible. But then he'd play. And for those moments, he wasn't invisible anymore. The music made him real, made him matter. Even if they didn't know his story, didn't see him as a person, they felt his music. That had to count for something. Rosa worried constantly. She'd tried to talk to Victoria once carefully about Gabriel's scholarship, but Victoria had been distracted, rushing to another appointment. "That's wonderful, Rosa. I'm sure he'll figure it out." Then she was gone. Figure it out. As if dreams ran on determination alone. As if talent was enough without opportunity. The truth was, Gabriel was running out of time. The scholarship could only be deferred so long. In 3 months, if he didn't accept it, the offer would go to someone else. Someone whose parents could afford to support them while they studied. Someone who didn't have to choose between their dreams and their family's survival. He'd lie awake at night, doing the math over and over. His warehouse job paid just enough to cover their rent and bills. Victoria's gig money was extra, but not nearly enough to live on alone. Even if he saved every penny from her parties, it wouldn't cover what they needed. The worst part was the music itself. Every time he sat at Victoria's grand piano, in her beautiful home filled with art and luxury, he felt the weight of what he was missing. He wasn't getting better anymore. Without proper instruction, without time to practice and study, his skills had plateaued. He was playing the same level he'd reached 2 years ago, just recycling what he already knew. His gift was being wasted, and he knew it. Every day that passed, he fell further behind students who had the privilege of time and training. Students who didn't have to work overnight shifts. Students whose parents could support their dreams. But what choice did he have? Rosa had sacrificed everything for him after his father died. Worked double shifts. Went without so he could have. He couldn't abandon her now. Couldn't chase his dreams while she struggled alone. So Gabriel kept playing at Victoria's parties. Kept stacking boxes at the warehouse. Kept saving his money and watching the scholarship deadline creep closer. Kept pretending that everything was fine, and Victoria kept hosting her events. Kept collecting compliments about her wonderful pianist. Kept writing checks to arts charities that supported other people's children. She'd post photos from her galas on social media, the piano visible in the background, and people would comment on the elegant ambiance. Neither of them knew that everything was about to change. That one conversation, one moment of actually being seen, would shift both their lives forever. But that moment hadn't arrived yet. For now, Gabriel remained invisible. A soundtrack to other people's glamorous lives. A genius hiding in plain sight, playing his heart out for people who'd never asked his last name. The invitation was printed on thick cream paper with gold lettering. Victoria held it up to the light, admiring the elegance. This wasn't just another charity gala. This was the event of the season. A fundraiser for the Metropolitan Youth Orchestra, and the guest of honor was Maestro Leonard Klein, one of the most respected conductors in the world. He was in town for just 2 weeks, scouting young talent for his summer program in Europe. Every wealthy family in the city wanted their musically inclined children to catch his attention. Victoria didn't have children in music, but hosting the maestro at her home would cement her status as the city's premier cultural patron. She spared no expense. The best caterers, rare wines, flowers imported from 3 different countries, and of course she called Rosa about Gabriel. This night had to be perfect. Gabriel arrived 2 hours early to practice. Victoria was upstairs getting ready, and didn't see him slip in through the service entrance. He looked tired, more tired than usual. He'd worked a double shift at the warehouse because someone called in sick. His supervisor promised extra pay, and Gabriel couldn't afford to say no. He'd gone straight from work to Victoria's house without sleeping, but when he sat at the piano, all the exhaustion faded. This was what he lived for, these moments when it was just him and the music. He ran through some pieces, warming up his fingers, and didn't notice the older man who'd arrived early and was standing in the doorway, listening. Maestro Klein had a habit of showing up before events started. He liked to see places without the performance, without the fake smiles and forced conversation. He'd let himself in through the front door and followed the sound of piano music. What he heard stopped him cold. The boy at the piano wasn't playing from sheet music. His eyes were closed and he was improvising, weaving together classical themes with modern harmonies in a way that shouldn't work but did, beautifully. The technical skill was impressive, but it was the emotion that caught the maestro's attention. This wasn't just someone who'd learned to play. This was someone who understood music in his bones. Gabriel finished the piece and opened his eyes. He nearly jumped off the bench when he saw the man standing there. "I'm sorry," Gabriel stammered. "I didn't know anyone was here. I was just warming up." "Don't apologize," Maestro Klein said, walking closer. His accent was thick, European. "That was remarkable. Where do you study?" Gabriel felt his cheeks burn. I teach myself mostly. Videos online, library books, that kind of thing." The maestro's eyebrows shot up. "Self-taught? That's impossible. The technique, the interpretation that takes years of proper instruction." "I had some lessons when I was younger," Gabriel admitted. "At a community center, but that program got cut a few years ago." "And you've maintained that level without a teacher?" The maestro shook his head in disbelief. "What's your name, young man?" "Gabriel, sir. I'm just here to play background music for the party." "Background music?" The maestro laughed. "My boy, you could play Carnegie Hall." Gabriel didn't know what to say to that. It felt like a fantasy, something from someone else's life. "Thank you, sir. That's really kind. It's not kindness. It's fact." The maestro pulled out a card from his jacket pocket. "I'm holding auditions this week for my summer program. We take 12 students to Europe for intensive training and performances. I want you there." Gabriel took the card with shaking hands. He'd heard of this program. Every serious music student had. It was legendary. People trained their whole lives hoping for this opportunity. "I don't think I can," Gabriel said quietly. "I work, and my mom needs help with bills, and I just don't think it's possible right now." "The program covers everything," Maestro Klein said. "Travel, room, board, instruction. You'd need nothing but your talent." He paused, studying Gabriel's face. "You have a gift. A real gift. It would be a tragedy to waste it." Before Gabriel could respond, voices filled the hallway. Guests were arriving. The maestro squeezed his shoulder. "Think about it. The audition is Thursday at 2. Come if you can." Then he disappeared into the growing crowd and Gabriel was left holding the card, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his chest. The party started and Gabriel played, but his mind was racing. Thursday at 2. He worked Thursday at 2. He'd have to call in sick, and he couldn't afford to lose the shift. But this was the maestro, the actual maestro. When would this chance come again? Victoria swept through the crowd, glowing with success. The maestro was charming everyone, and several guests had already written large checks for the youth orchestra. She caught glimpses of him throughout the night, always surrounded by admirers. During a quiet moment, she saw the maestro standing near the piano, watching Gabriel play. She walked over, ready to introduce herself properly. "Your pianist is extraordinary," the maestro said before she could speak. "Where did you find such talent?" Victoria hesitated. "He's the son of my housekeeper, actually." "He's been playing for my events." "Your housekeeper's son?" The maestro looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "And you've been using him for party music?" Something in his tone made Victoria uncomfortable. "He's very good. My guests always compliment his playing." "He's not very good," the maestro said flatly. "He's exceptional. Possibly one of the most naturally gifted young pianists I've encountered in my 40 years of teaching." He turned to face her fully. "Does he study anywhere?" "Who's his instructor?" "I don't know," Victoria admitted. "I've never really asked." The maestro was quiet for a moment. "I've invited him to audition for my summer program." "I hope he comes." It would be a crime for talent like that to go undeveloped. He walked away, leaving Victoria standing alone near the piano. She felt something twist in her stomach. Uncomfortable, shameful. She'd been having Gabriel play at her parties for months and never once asked about his training, his dreams, his life. She'd treated him like a service she'd hired, not a person with his own story. The rest of the party passed in a blur. Victoria smiled and chatted and accepted compliments, but her mind kept drifting back to what the maestro said. Exceptional. One of the most gifted. A crime to go undeveloped. When the last guest left, she watched Gabriel pack up his things. Rosa came to collect him, and Victoria saw them walk toward the service entrance together. Gabriel was showing his mother something. A card. Rosa's hand flew to her mouth and she hugged her son tight. Victoria stood in the doorway of her ballroom, surrounded by the remnants of her successful party. Empty champagne glasses, scattered napkins, the lingering smell of expensive perfume. She'd raised thousands of dollars tonight for young musicians, had written the check herself, eager for the tax deduction and the recognition. But there'd been a real musician in her home all along, and she'd paid him pocket change and never looked deeper. For the first time in years, Victoria felt truly ashamed. Not the polite embarrassment of a social mistake. Real deep shame that made her chest tight. She pulled out her phone and texted Rosa. "Can you come by tomorrow morning? I'd like to speak with you and Gabriel if he's available." The response came quickly. "Yes, Mrs. Ashworth, we'll be there." Victoria looked around her empty ballroom one more time. The piano sat silent in the corner, and she wondered how many other important things she'd missed while being too busy, too distracted, too wrapped up in her own world to see what was right in front of her. Victoria couldn't sleep that night. She kept replaying the maestro's words in her head. A crime to go undeveloped. She'd built her entire life around charity work, thrown countless galas, written enormous checks to arts organizations. Her walls were covered with awards for philanthropy, yet she'd been blind to real need right under her own roof. At 7 in the morning, she was already in her kitchen making coffee when Rosa and Gabriel arrived. They came to the front door this time because Victoria had insisted. No more service entrance. Gabriel looked nervous. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, and he clutched the maestro's card like a lifeline. Rosa stood beside him, her hand protectively on his shoulder. They both looked uncomfortable in Victoria's pristine kitchen with its marble countertops and custom cabinets that cost more than they made in a year. "Sit, please," Victoria said, gesturing to the breakfast table. She poured coffee for all three of them, her hands shaking slightly. She'd never done this before. Never sat down with her staff like equals. Never asked about their lives beyond work schedules and vacation days. "Gabriel," she started, then stopped. She'd practiced what to say all night, but now the words felt inadequate. "The maestro told me about the audition. He said you're exceptionally talented." Gabriel nodded but didn't speak. He didn't know what Victoria wanted, and years of being invisible had taught him to be careful around wealthy people. "Their moods change like weather. Why didn't you tell me?" Victoria asked. "About your gift, about your dreams?" Rosa and Gabriel exchanged a glance. "You never asked Mrs. Ashworth," Rosa said quietly. And Gabriel was grateful for the work. We both were. The simple honesty of that statement hit Victoria harder than any accusation could have. She took a shaky breath. "Tell me now. Please, I want to know everything." So they told her. Gabriel's father had died when he was 14. Heart attack, sudden and devastating. The medical bills and funeral costs had buried them in debt. Rosa worked as many hours as she could, but it was never quite enough. Gabriel had started working at 12. Odd jobs at first, then the warehouse when he turned 16. "He got a scholarship," Rosa said, her voice thick with pride and pain. "Full ride to the State Music Academy. Best program in the region. Teachers who worked with famous musicians. Gabriel earned it fair and square. Beat out hundreds of other kids. But the scholarship only covered tuition," Gabriel added. His voice was soft but steady. "Not living expenses. Not the books and fees. And definitely not enough for Mom to keep paying bills without my warehouse income." "So you deferred it," Victoria said. "It wasn't a question." "Twice," Gabriel confirmed. "I can defer one more semester. After that, the spot goes to someone else." He looked down at his coffee. "The deadline is in 6 weeks." Victoria felt like she'd been punched. This boy, this incredibly talented young man, had been playing at her parties while his dreams died on a countdown timer. and she'd been handing him a few $100s like it was generosity. "The Maestro's program," she said. "Thursday at 2. Are you going to audition?" Gabriel shook his head. "I work Thursdays. I already missed 2 days last month when I was sick. If I call in again, I might lose the job. We can't risk it." "What if you didn't have to work?" Victoria asked. "What if your bills were covered? What if you could focus entirely on music?" Rosa stiffened. "Mrs. Ashworth, we're not asking for charity." "I know you're not," Victoria said. "That's what makes this so much worse. You've never asked me for anything except the chance to work." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at her perfectly manicured garden. "Do you know how much I spent on flowers for last night's party?" $8,000. For flowers that died today. She turned back to face them. "I chair 4 charity boards. I write checks to organizations that help underprivileged youth pursue their dreams. I get awards for it. I post about it on social media. I feel good about myself for being so generous." Her voice cracked. "And meanwhile, there's been a real person with a real dream working in my home, and I never saw it." "I never saw you, Gabriel." "I'm so sorry." Gabriel didn't know what to say. He'd imagined wealthy people apologizing to him before, usually in anger during his warehouse shifts when he fantasized about telling off his supervisor. But this felt different, real, raw. "I want to help," Victoria continued. "Not because it makes me look good or helps me feel better about myself, but because it's the right thing to do. Because I should have done it months ago." She sat back down at the table. "I want to pay off your debts. All of them. I want to cover your living expenses so Gabriel can accept that scholarship. And I want to make sure he gets to that audition on Thursday." Rosa was crying now, tears streaming silently down her face. "Mrs. Ashworth, that's too much." "We can't accept that. Why not?" Victoria asked. "I spend more on a single dinner party than it would cost to change your entire lives. How is that fair?" She reached across the table and took Rosa's hand. "Please let me do this. Not as your employer, but as someone who's been given a chance to do something that actually matters." Gabriel spoke up, his voice stronger now. "What if I don't get into the Maestro's program? What if I'm not as good as he thinks?" "Then you'll still have your scholarship to the academy," Victoria said. "And you'll know you tried. You'll know you took the shot." She looked at him intently. "Gabriel, I've heard you play dozens of times. I wasn't really listening before, but I am now. You're extraordinary. The Maestro doesn't give out invitations lightly. But even if this doesn't work out, you deserve the chance to pursue your gift without choosing between your dreams and your family's survival." The kitchen was quiet except for the soft sound of Rosa crying. Gabriel sat very still, the Maestro's card still in his hand. His whole life he'd made practical choices. Safe choices. Choices that helped his mom, that kept them afloat. He'd watched his dreams from a distance like something that happened to other people. "Okay," he whispered. Then louder, "Okay, I'll do it. I'll go to the audition." Rosa grabbed her son's hand and squeezed it tight. "Your father would be so proud," she said. Victoria felt tears prick her own eyes. She'd spent years throwing parties and raising money and collecting awards. She'd felt important, necessary, good. But sitting in her kitchen with Rosa and Gabriel, making a real difference in real lives, was the first time she'd felt truly useful. "You'll need to prepare," she said, pulling out her phone. "The best piano teacher in the city owes me a favor. I'll call her today. You'll work with her every day until Thursday. And Gabriel, I want you to quit the warehouse. Today, you're done with that." "But the money," Gabriel started. "I'll cover everything," Victoria interrupted. "Your family's bills, the medical debt, rent, food, everything. Consider it back pay for all the months I underpaid you." She smiled. "And when you get into that program, and I believe you will, you'll go to Europe without worrying about anything except becoming the pianist you were meant to be." Gabriel looked at his mother, then back at Victoria. For the first time since she'd known him, he smiled. Really smiled. It transformed his whole face, made him look like the teenager he was instead of someone carrying the weight of the world. "Thank you," he said simply. But those 2 words carried everything. Hope, gratitude, relief, and the fragile beginning of trust. Victoria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She'd make the calls today, set everything in motion. For once in her privileged life, she was going to do something that mattered, not for recognition or tax benefits or social status, but because a young man with a gift deserved a chance, and she had the power to give it to him. The sun streamed through the kitchen window. catching the steam rising from their coffee cups. Outside, Victoria's expensive flowers were already wilting in their arrangements. But inside, something was beginning to bloom. Thursday arrived faster than Gabriel expected. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind. Victoria had kept every promise. The piano teacher, a woman named Mrs. Chen who'd trained concert pianists for 30 years, had worked with him for hours each day. She'd been tough, demanding, pushing him harder than anyone ever had. But she'd also been amazed. "You have raw talent I rarely see," she'd told him after their first session. "But more than that, you have soul. That can't be taught." Gabriel had practiced until his fingers ached, then practiced more. He'd slept in a guest room at Victoria's house so he wouldn't waste time commuting. Rosa had cried when she saw the room with its comfortable bed and private bathroom. "This is too much," she'd whispered. But Victoria had insisted. Now, standing outside the concert hall where auditions were being held, Gabriel felt like he might throw up. His hands were sweating. His heart raced. 20 other young pianists were auditioning today for 12 spots. Most of them had trained at prestigious schools their whole lives. He was the kid who'd learned from YouTube videos and library books. "You've got this," Rosa said, squeezing his arm. She'd taken the day off work to be there. Victoria stood on his other side, looking more nervous than he'd ever seen her. "Just play like you did at my house," Victoria said. "Let them hear what I should have heard months ago." Gabriel nodded and walked inside. The waiting area was filled with teenagers and their parents. Everyone looked polished, prepared, expensive. Designer clothes, professional portfolios, the confidence that came from always having doors open for you. Gabriel wore a new suit Victoria had bought him, but he still felt like an imposter. A woman with a clipboard called his name. "Gabriel Santos? You're up?" His legs felt weak as he walked into the audition room. It was huge, with perfect acoustics and a beautiful grand piano in the center. Maestro Klein sat at a table with 2 other judges. He smiled when he saw Gabriel. "Ah, the young man from the party. I'm glad you came." The maestro gestured to the piano. "Play whatever speaks to you. We want to hear your voice, not just your technique." Gabriel sat at the bench. His hands trembled as he placed them on the keys. For a moment, his mind went blank. Then he thought about his father, who used to sit with him during those early community center lessons, who'd worked double shifts so Gabriel could have a better life, who never got to see what his son could become. He thought about his mother, cleaning other people's houses, never complaining, always believing in him even when he stopped believing in himself. He thought about the warehouse, the overnight shifts, the dreams he'd almost let die, and then he played. He started with a classical piece, something by Chopin that Mrs. Chen had helped him polish, but halfway through he let it evolve into something else, something that was his own. The music became a story, his story, the grief of losing his father, the weight of responsibility, the exhaustion of working while his friends went to school, but also the hope, the stubborn refusal to give up, the beauty he'd found even in the darkest times. His eyes closed. The room disappeared. There was only the music and the feeling pouring through his fingers. He played like he might never get another chance because for so long he'd believed he wouldn't. When the final note faded, the room was silent. Gabriel opened his eyes, suddenly terrified that he'd made a mistake, that he'd been too emotional, too raw, too unprofessional. Then Maestro Klein stood up. He was clapping. The other 2 judges joined him. They weren't just politely clapping either. They were on their feet, applauding like he'd just performed at Carnegie Hall. "In 40 years, the maestro said, his voice thick with emotion, I have heard thousands of auditions. What you just played, young man, that was not an audition. That was art." He walked over to the piano. "You're self-taught?" "Mostly," Gabriel managed to say. "I had some early lessons, but nothing formal for years." "Remarkable," one of the other judges said. "Absolutely remarkable." The maestro pulled Gabriel to his feet. "You have a spot in the program. If you want it, it's yours." Gabriel couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He just nodded, and the maestro laughed and shook his hand. "We leave for Europe in 2 weeks. Can you be ready?" "Yes," Gabriel said. Then louder, stronger, "Yes, sir. I'll be ready." When he walked out of the audition room, Rosa and Victoria were both standing up, their faces anxious. Gabriel couldn't keep the smile off his face. Rosa knew immediately. She screamed and threw her arms around him, and Victoria was crying and hugging them both. And for a moment they were just 3 people celebrating something wonderful, all the old boundaries forgotten. The next 2 weeks were chaos. Passport applications, shopping for the trip, more intensive practice sessions. Victoria handled the logistics with the same efficiency she brought to her parties. But now it was personal. Now it mattered. She also did something else. She called a meeting with her charity boards and proposed a new initiative. A scholarship fund specifically for overlooked talented young people from working families. Kids like Gabriel who had gifts but not opportunities. She'd seed it with a substantial donation from her own money, not her foundation's. Real money that she'd actually miss. I want us to actively look for these kids, she told the board. Not wait for them to come to us. Go to community centers, public schools, anywhere talented kids might be hiding because no one's paying attention. Some board members were skeptical. We already have scholarship programs, one said. Programs that require applications and essays and recommendations, Victoria countered. Programs that assume these kids have the time and resources to navigate them. I want us to do better. I want us to find the Gabriels before they have to choose between their dreams and feeding their families. The board approved it. They'd call it the Santos Initiative, named after the young man who'd opened Victoria's eyes to her own blindness. The day Gabriel left for Europe, a crowd gathered at the airport. Mrs. Chen came to say goodbye. Some of Victoria's friends who'd heard him play at parties came to wish him well. Even his old supervisor from the warehouse showed up, looking uncomfortable but genuinely proud. You're going to be famous someday, the supervisor said. I'll tell everyone I knew you when. Gabriel hugged his mother tight. I'll call you every day, he promised. Just focus on your music, Rosa said, tears streaming down her face. This is your time. Your father and I were so proud of you. Victoria stood back, watching the scene. 6 weeks ago, she'd dismissed this boy as just the help's son. Now she was watching him leave to study with one of the world's greatest teachers. The transformation wasn't just his. It was hers, too. Gabriel turned to her before going through security. Thank you, Mrs. Ashworth, for everything. For seeing me. Thank you, Victoria said, for helping me learn how to see. She watched him disappear into the crowd, this young man with calloused hands and a gift that could move people to tears. She thought about all the years she'd spent feeling important, feeling generous, feeling like she was making a difference. She'd had to learn the hard way that real charity wasn't about checks and galas and recognition. It was about paying attention, about seeing people as they actually were, not as background characters in your own life. 3 months later, Victoria received a video message from Gabriel. He was performing in a concert hall in Vienna, looking confident and happy in a way she'd never seen before. The piece he played was dedicated to 3 people. His father, who'd encouraged his early love of music, his mother, who'd sacrificed everything, and Mrs. Ashworth, who'd taught him that sometimes the people who seem not to care are just people who haven't learned to see. Victoria watched the video 3 times, crying through all of them. She'd helped save one talented kid, but because of that one kid, she'd changed her entire approach to philanthropy. The Santos Initiative had already identified 15 young people who needed support. Real support, not just money. Mentorship, guidance, someone paying attention. She'd spent her whole life trying to be important. Turned out, the most important thing she'd ever done was simply opening her eyes and really looking at the people around her. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. Just seeing someone, really seeing them, and deciding they matter. Gabriel's gift hadn't just changed his life. It had changed hers too. And that, Victoria realized, was the real magic of what happened when you stopped treating people as invisible and started treating them as human.